Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Raise.Dev Hacktoberfest Help Desk. My name is Joe, and I'm your host for the last time this week. We've got another host joining us later. I'll get to that in a minute. For those of you who are new to the show, this Hacktoberfest Help Desk is your resource this Hacktoberfest to get all the help you need with landing your PRs during the month of October, during Hacktoberfest. That means we're coming to you with tips and tricks for completing PRs you're already working on and projects you've already found, but also showing you new projects and new ways to contribute to those projects as well. Today, we're playing our favorite game with a guest we've got on, which we call Get Blame, where we look at some old code they've done in the past and talk about how they would do it differently today. We'll also learn a little bit about them and their role. This is kind of in our theme of, exploring what developer careers can be, and also exploring how our developer careers change as we learn and grow, and how we might write code differently today than we did yesterday. So I'll bring them on very shortly, and we'll kick off the show. But before that, a couple of bits of administravia, as usual, for those of you who are familiar to this routine. First up, as I said, we are here to help you first and foremost, and give you the answers you need to your developer career and your open source journey. And that means you can ask questions to us anytime in chat. If they are directly relevant to what we're talking about right now, we'll try and answer them right away. If you're asking something completely different, we will also answer it, but it might take us a little bit to get to, because we'll finish what we're talking about and circle back around. Why am I giving you that warning? Because for some reason, the meme of the week has been that we're not live. We are definitely live. I promise you we're live, and we will answer your questions. Just be patient with us if they're off topic. The other thing about that is the internet is a big and scary place. And so we do have a moderation bot running to filter out links as they are put in the chat, URLs, things you post from the internet. That's not a problem. If you want to share a URL to a resource about what we're talking about, or your own project, or something else entirely, you can totally do that. Just give me a warning by @RaiseDevs in the chat. That'll mention me, and then I'll permit you to post the link so you don't get filtered by a moderation bot. So it's not a problem at all. So in summary, ask questions, post links. It's all good. We'll have a good time. The other bit of administrivia for the week is, I said, we are live three times a day, every weekday of Hacktoberfest, and that's a lot to keep up with. However will you cope? You can cope by following us on Twitch. Hit the love heart, then hit the bell. That will give you notifications whenever we go live. You can also follow us on Twitter, where we tweet an hour before every show at RaiseDevs as soon as I find the banner. Can't find the banner. The banner's gone. There's the banner. Twitter.com/RaiseDevs. And you can follow us on there, where we regularly tweet about the guests we've got coming on, telling you what's coming up. If you want to check out that schedule yourself, you can do that at twitch.tv/RaiseDevs schedule. That's updated weekly. So currently that link is completely useless to you because it's only up to date for this show and the next show. Ignore Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I will update that over the weekend for next week, and I'll stick around at the end of the show, and I'll give you a teaser of who we've got coming on next week and let you know what's happening then. So the last thing from me before I bring on our guest: if you haven't heard of Raise.Dev, we are a service to help you level up in your developer career, whether you're trying to get your first developer job after a career change or after a boot camp, or you're trying to get a promotion from mid-level to senior, or you're trying to become an engineering lead. Whatever it is, we have expert coaches who will help you make that transition in your career. They'll get you the experience you need to make that jump. And we are completely free right now whilst we're in early access. You can sign up below at Raise.Dev and meet your coach. So yeah, that's everything. Let me bring in our guest for the show. Welcome, Stephen. How are you doing?
Hello, Joe. Thanks. I'm doing quite well. How are you?
Excellent. Very good. Thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself for the folks on the show?
Sure. I'm Stephen Young. I am a backend engineering team lead at Customer.io. I've been writing code since I was 15 years old, and nice. Everything from large-scale web crawlers to what I do now, which is big distributed backend systems.
Yeah, awesome. Very cool. So to recap, I guess kind of how the show is going to walk today. Hi, Skywolf, welcome. So yeah, to recap how the show is going to work today, we're going to start diving into your career, particularly being a team lead. I think you're the first team lead we've had on the show, actually. So we've got lots of questions about that. And then we're going to flip around at some point to talk about some old code you wrote, I guess on the topic of building distributed systems, which is an SMTP server that's still in use at Customer.io. So along the way, we should also talk about Customer.io and what it is and why you have SMTP servers, I guess. So yeah, I guess let's kick off with you. So you said you've been coding since you were 15 years old. Like, what was your introduction to coding? How did your developer journey start?
I started. Do you remember Macromedia Director? It was
hell yeah.
Prior to Flash, yeah. And so my dad is a computer teacher at a high school, and he would do like these summer courses, and I helped him out with those. So I made stuff in there, and then kind of graduated to Flash until I was writing Flash without any actual objects on the screen. I realized it was just programming, and
that's amazing.
The
old action script.
Yeah.
Was that that was Macromedia? So that was like action script before they basically just made it into JavaScript when it was still like
weird. Yeah, exactly. When it was still kind of ECMA script light.
Yeah, very cool. Wasn't that Adobe Directory? No, before. So Macromedia got acquired. I don't know what they called it after the acquisition, because Director went away after the acquisition, I think.
Yeah, I think Director was maybe even dead before the acquisition. But yeah. So they were bought by Adobe and became Adobe Flash. But
the good old times.
Dating myself by predating Adobe Flash, which is now also dead.
It's literally the first thing the minute they say like where they got started with coding, they're like, oh, I've just dated myself. We need a timeline. I just want to draw this comment. I'm 15. I just started coding. That's awesome. Call me Dapper, please. Yeah. Welcome. I hope you're enjoying your journey.
You someday.
Yeah. What have you just started coding? Call me Dapper. Let us know in the chat. So that's super cool. And I guess like from there, so from like that initial toying around, did you go on to like do it in school, or was it always kind of like something you self-taught?
Yeah, I mean, I self-taught through high school, and then I did a standard computer science degree.
Nice.
And didn't actually go to a lot of the classes because I was already a little bit further ahead. But so then I started working at startups all through university, and just continued from there.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost an expected function of computer science classes. Like my experience of computer science classes was like the folks who had learned coding long before didn't need to go to a lot of the introductory lectures. And then the folks who like who hadn't coded went to them and caught up, but it kind of all balanced out because although like you self-taught, when you self-teach, you might know those things, but there's still always bits you miss or have like not got exactly how the teacher wants to test you on them. And so at the end of the day, it's like an equalizing function, but everyone gets across the line at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, awesome. Call Me Dapper, please, to start doing game dev in C#. I'm guessing that's in Unity then, Call Me Dapper? Or are you using the other one, Godot or anything like that? Anyway, cool. So that's super neat. So you started working in some startups, which I guess brings us to Customer I/O. And as I was saying to you before the chat, when you signed up to volunteer for the show, I was super excited because we had just been like looking at Customer I/O for Raise.dev and our launch. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what like Customer I/O is and how it works and how it's useful?
Sure. So Customer I/O is a customer engagement platform where you can bring in data to send targeted messages and engage your audience. So kind of on a technical level, it's a giant stream of customer data coming in, and we allow you to very easily organize that data such that you can reach out to customers over email or SMS or push notifications.
Right. So I guess it kind of fits in that like family of like, marketing automation technologies and like Twilio-esque use cases, but you're building out that use case a little bit more than you would do if I was a company grabbing Twilio and like building that, I guess.
Yeah, and actually Twilio is an interesting one because they're one of the services that we send messages through, and so you can can do the automation over top of Twilio. So
wicked.
If you want to only target people who have purchased 5 things from your store in the last month and also visited your website once, and also are high engagement users, like they click your emails often or SMSs often, you can do things like that.
Very cool.
And we have 1,700 customers across a whole variety of like fintech, edtech, software as a service, some relatively big names like Ring Home Cameras and Codecademy, Reddit, The Economist, Segment, and Notion.
Oh, Reddit is those are some very big names. That's super cool, neat. Wonderful. So I guess now that we know what Customer I/O is, like the big thing I want to talk to you today was like your day-to-day as a team lead. So as I said, like you saw our intro. Our whole thing here at Raise.dev is helping people get to where they want to be in their developer careers, and a lot of people entering the industry. There's like going into team leadership is one of the paths that's like laid out for like starting engineers in a lot of ways. So what does your day-to-day as a team lead look like? What does that mean? What is being a team lead?
So I mean, maybe I can. So I started definitely as just a pure software developer. I was hired as a scalability engineer, actually.
Right.
And at the time I joined the company, there was like 8 of us. So it was a very small company. We're now over 64, so we've doubled a few times. And so kind of needed to figure out some structure. To make sure we can support people, and so we kind of elevated a couple of us to doing that team leadership, which it's an interesting shift from the normal engineering paths because you're you spend a lot more time during the week talking to people and like making sure that the direct reports and things that I work with happy and healthy and
Yeah.
able to make good progress on
Cool.
what's a very complicated application.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that I think is the key bit, right? Like they're able to do their work. So I guess like what are some of the ways that like you keep your team unblocked to speak in very businessy manager talk?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I found it's very different, like on a very individual basis. Some people,
right,
all they need to be unblocked is to have the space and the time, and you just say,
right,
go work on your stuff. I'm not going to bother you.
Yeah.
Other people really
Yeah.
need like access to pairing and like early code review,
right,
and basically an environment in which they can be safe to ask questions and safe to
Sure.
safe to experiment.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, especially as they're learning new parts of the application or new parts of the technology. I mean, we're almost entirely Go,
Cool.
our backend,
Yeah.
but we historically haven't hired a lot of direct Go programmers, just
Right.
for whatever reason. We don't discriminate, I guess, when we're hiring. We say,
oh, that's super cool.
We want good developers. We don't want,
and we'll train you in our specific stack.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a lot of
really
like
interesting. Yeah,
passing on some of that knowledge as well.
That's super interesting. So to dwell on that for a little bit, like say I join the company and I am a Haskell developer. Like, what is your what do they just get straight in on code and they're learning by pairing, or do you have like an onboarding Go Academy? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, largely it's been pairing,
Cool.
and kind of like a slow rollout of issues and things, and and what they're working on. Just because it's one thing to learn an entirely new code base, but also to learn a new code base while you're learning the code. I think it's just like a gradual growth kind of thing.
Cool.
I mean, we have like an internal document of here's a bunch of resources. We have a fairly generous training budget as well. So for people who really benefit from books or from going to take a course or whatever, 100% on board with that.
Awesome. Very cool. So you mentioned pairing a couple of times. That's something that we come back to time and again on the show because a lot of Rails.dev happens over pairing. What are your like? I never know how to ask this question. Like, what's your approach to pairing? Like, what do you consider to be a good pairing session?
I'd say like my core requirement is that I'm not the one that's driving. It's more like me over like in there looking over the person's shoulder and helping them out. It can always be a little bit uncomfortable for the first few times where it's just like, oh, well, there's the senior engineer just kind of looking over,
surveilled.
And there's nothing more hilarious than the inevitable people become absolutely bonkers at typing as soon as you're watching them type. Which you may I guess I probably won't be doing any typing in the Git blame, so I'll spare you that. But
that's literally a common theme. Every single time we've spoken about this, someone has gone like, "Oh yeah, the minute someone's looking at me, I lose the ability to use a computer." And it's
brain completely falls out of your head.
Yeah, amazing, very cool. So yeah, awesome. If anyone has any questions, this is my regular schedule reminder. If you have any questions, you can throw them at any time. So if you have any questions for Stephen about being a team lead or being team led, I guess, throw those in the chat and we will get to those as well. Don't let me hog the stage. Cool. So in terms of like your path to being a team lead, so you said that like you were originally a scalability engineer and then that like the company went for that process of realizing like, oh, hey, this is a role we need now. What was it that like, what made you want to go for it? What was it that said that like, hey, this is something that I think I would be good at?
I would say that I was looking for a new challenge a little bit. And so the company from its inception has been fully remote. I mean, I guess probably not. I mean, when it was just the two founders sitting in an office, it wasn't
really, that counts as remote.
The company has been remote first forever.
Awesome.
Remote first before it was cool, or before it was mandated by the pandemic, rather.
Like, what kind of time zone do you have? Like big time zone spreads, or is that just like similar region but no office kind of thing?
Oh yeah, we're all across the globe. We've got people in Australia, and we've got people on the Pacific West Coast. So the full spread everywhere. Of the world, and everything in between. So I think the environment of a remote team is very, very interesting. It was it's the first like really cohesive remote team that I've been I've worked with. Whereas prior to that, it's been kind of like, yeah, it's sort of remote, but it doesn't really work. And
right.
either you just end up in Zoom, like one big Zoom call at the same time or whatever. But
interesting.
And so I think the communication side of it has was something I was really interested in. Like, how do I help facilitate keeping that connection among the engineers? Because the company meets up twice a year somewhere.
Maybe not now. Traditionally,
actually, interestingly, so we have our next retreat is next week. And we're doing it all in VR. So we've got
that's super cool.
Oculus goggles and
what software are you using for that? I imagine by this point in the COVID that someone has made a virtual offsite.
We're doing. There's an app called Rec Room, I think, that you can like build little VR spaces, and possibly VR chat. I'm not sure. I've only seen weird videos of VR chat before, so I don't.
VR chat is an internet nightmare. But when it's just your company doing its own thing, I imagine it's far better. That's awesome. So, oh god, now that you've spoken about remote, I have a whole heap of questions. We will get to the people in chat. Hold me accountable. Don't let me talk about remote for this entire thing. We will get to the Go code. So you said that like this is the first kind of cohesive remote team you've been on. So obviously, like now that this is everyone's reality, I'm seeing a lot of people, and I've always worked remote as well. So this is something that like I'm trying to work out what is useful advice and like what isn't just me, with my remote friendly complacency. Well, like what are the things that you think make that team particularly cohesive and work well for communication remotely?
I think a strong focus on non-work communication peppered within the work communication. Like we have a fairly strong culture of just like joking around and which I think it's absolutely invaluable to have that level of like connection with your coworkers, which I think is something that like I feel like we really peak that at the retreat, where it's just like a weird crazy week of 60 VR people getting VR chat, or when we were back in the before time, being able to like get all together and just we're taking over a hotel for a week and just hanging out. And so anything we can do to kind of improve a lot of that type of communication I think is super important. Customer IO is really like customer focused organization as well. Like we
makes sense given the
name. We haven't taken a ton of funding, so we're not really like we have a lot more control over like the direction of the company, and we've so we've been really like support focused, which I think has been interestingly just a really strong overall strength, because if you're support focused outwardly, you tend to
have that culture,
apply that internally as well.
Very cool. That's super neat. And so last question on this, and I promise I'll move on. So you're doing a lot of pair programming. Obviously, you're doing that remotely. Like, how are you running remote pair programming sessions? So partly why I asked this is I noticed in the last couple of months that I feel like there is now like 50 remote pair programming startups. And so I'm really intrigued, like what is happening that people feel this is necessary?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like I think largely my pairing at this point is just over Zoom.
Cool. Just like a little screen share.
Yeah, the one that I really miss is, do you remember Screen Hero? I think they were bought by Slack. And they were super good. And then they just got eaten by the Slack.
I think we're at like peak Screen Hero nostalgia now, because I can't know which service it is, but there's an alternative going around right now who's like headline on their site. The only thing they say on their site is literally like, we're the new Screen Hero. And it's like, okay. I see what's happening here. I never got to use Screen Hero. By the time I discovered it was bought by Slack, but our founder John Britton talks about Screen Hero all the time. It's really wonderful. Cool. Rest in peace, Screen Hero. Indeed, Adrian.
Pour one out for our family over at Screen Hero.
Yeah, indeed. So cool. So I guess now would be a good time to we spoke about Customer IO and like the kind of things you're up to. So I guess that'd be a good time to introduce the project that we're looking at today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So the project, which is shelved under my sub group called Mail Proto because of a historical issue where I wanted to change the name of something, or I think I changed the name, my GitHub username, and I angered a lot of people who were using a PHP library I'd written because it broke their flows. So I decided I would shelve this under somewhere else. So it's mailproto/SMTPD.
Which I've thrown in chat. Here you go.
Yeah, and I can.
Cool.
Adrian,
they've got to give some context. Like Adrian just said, for those of you who didn't watch our show yesterday with Adrian, we had the I mentioned at the beginning of the show that we've had this weird thing this week where people think we're not live. Someone came into chat and said, if you're live, say yabba dabba do. I didn't see that message. Adrian did, and so I added him to the show, and his first thing he said was, "Hi, I'm Adrian, yabba dabba do." And I thought he was just going like crazy, and so I just like was trying to be a nice host and just ignored it and moved on. And then I saw the chat message and was like, okay, good. We haven't lost Adrian. Okay, let me add that screen back up.
That's very good. Maybe you should just make all your guests start doing that. Just hello.
Yeah, I'm just gonna like give everyone a random phrase. Yeah. We'll host a phrase generator that we can spin up.
Yeah, I'm sure someone has one sitting around that you can get blame on as well.
That'd be perfect. Cool. So this is the thing under Mail Proto. So first question, and we're going to have lots of foundational questions because I said I think you're our first guest where we're actually looking at Go code on the show, which is weird how we've gotten 3 weeks in and not seen any Go. But what is an SMTP server?
So SMTP, first of all, is the underlying protocol that backs email. So an SMTP server obviously is the server side of that. So it's set up to speak the SMTP language and send messages or receive messages and do whatever you want with them. So it's kind of it's definitely not the type of SMTP server that you would just run up on a box and say, great, now I've got an email server running. It's more
it's built particular for
an embedded SMTP server, I guess I would call it. And so the purpose and the reason that I wrote it originally is that at Customer IO, one of the is if you've ever been in your email and you've seen a little button above an email that says unsubscribe, where it's just like a one-click unsubscribe. So there are 2 ways you can implement that. One of them is with passing in a URL as part of a header, and another one is passing in a special SMTP address, so like a special email address. And the special email address has better support often, and also is less likely to get crawled by a crawler. Whereas you could have, if you put in a one-click unsubscribe URL and then they decide to just crawl your headers, then everyone's going to get unsubscribed. I think in practice it's probably okay, but it seemed like a good idea at the beginning for sure to do the unsubscribe over email. And so we needed an SMTP server that could kind of handle that. And there wasn't anything sitting around, so I wrote one up.
Makes sense. Yeah, so I guess I think I mentioned this at some point. It might have been in the tweet. Just to emphasize for folks, this is definitely our first Git Blame, like reviewing old code, where the code we're reviewing is still running in production at the company. So this is a very special episode of Git Blame, where we're looking at old code that still has a function. So that's very nice. Cool. So now we're in VS Code with a very nice VS Code theme. So it also being Go, I am going to ask you to go educate us a little bit as we go along. Where should we start with this server? And I'm guessing we're looking at main. Well, we're looking at the README right now.
Yeah, so this is the README. The same thing that we were looking up on GitHub. Cool. I mean, it's a server, so probably a good idea to start with a server.go. Awesome. And apparently, this environment is set up for all sorts of weird Go stuff. So we're probably not going to get syntax highlight, or I guess we'll get syntax highlighting, but not much else.
And we're seeing on the commit at the bottom here that the last commit test was 5 years ago, or your last commit to this? I don't know what that's.
Yeah, so that was my last commit would have been 5 years ago. I think the last commit to it, and we'll get to that, was just a couple of months ago.
Cool.
But it was the first one in several years.
Right.
And so definitely, I mean, as we're doing like effectively a live code review, this is definitely where I would start.
Perfect.
And so you want to just jump right into it, or any
absolutely, let's go for it. So so I guess like we've laid out what an SMTP server is and why in particular you wrote one. You said that this was embedded, so I guess that's going to come into the structure of the thing, that like it's not meant to be run as a standalone binary.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think there's no like this is the server and it does everything kind of thing. And you'll see that a lot of like it's got a lot of stuff that you definitely wouldn't want if you were just trying to do an off-the-shelf solution. things like a whole extension system that I'm not a huge fan of, but
okay.
And yeah, so yeah, maybe I'll start with just going through like a really quick dive through, and then we can jump back.
Yeah, hone in on some specific bits.
Yeah, so we've got kind of the server struct, which gives you the whole like kind of object-y kind of thing that holds all this stuff, and does a whole whack of things.
Yeah.
The really interesting stuff tends to happen, so this is a kind of standard structure for a Go thing. You do a listen and serve, which opens up a net listener, which is just a TCP connection. And then as soon as that's done, for some reason I did it this way, but it drops a ready onto a channel.
Okay, cool.
And then as it starts accepting messages, it spawns Go routines. This is a really cool feature of Go.
Yeah, that's like one of the big hallmark reasons for Go. Do you want to briefly go on a detour and explain what a Go routine is?
Yeah, sure. So Go routines, I think I would qualify them similar to like greenlets in Python, or I don't know. I think there's something similar in JavaScript, promises or something. But basically, it's a threading system built into Go, or a threading-esque system that kind of sits on top of the actual like logical threads of your computer.
Right.
And so
remembering correctly, they're green threads. Is that right?
Yeah, I think they qualify as green threads. I don't. Yeah. It's been a while since I've.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not like I kind of have gotten a little bit more complacent with Go because they're just there. Back when I used to write Python crawlers and tried to do the similar stuff, there was a lot more
learning a lot of the differences,
fooling around with what's it actually mean and what is it actually going to work concurrently.
Yeah.
So it's a concurrency primitive, so it's native to Go, which is very cool. So you can just so instead of blocking here, this is just going to spawn a Go routine that's going to go do stuff. If there wasn't this for loop wrapping this and you called Go, the whole thing would just exit right away because nothing's keeping it there.
Sure. Cool. Oh, but yeah, this for loop has no. Can't remember what it is. This for loop is this is running the whole server just constantly, right?
This exactly.
It's just looping forever. Right.
Yeah. And again, I think this is kind of like one of those. I wrote this the first pass. I've even got a to do here saying this is a terrible way to do it.
But it is a properly marked to do. It is like.
Yeah, exactly. It looks like I was doing a reasonable thing. Interestingly, like things like this, where it's a to-do, add support for SSL. Technically, the server does support SSL, but doesn't support SSL right out of the box. So
interesting. Okay.
We can get into that a little bit with the way SMTP works. But and then kind of down here, we've got handle SMTP, which goes through and actually accepts the connection. SMTP is a really, really chatty protocol. It was designed forever ago by people who didn't really think it was going to be used for giant mass communication all the time.
Interesting. But so the story of so much of the internet.
Yeah, exactly. And so an actual SMTP, I am going to type. So an actual SMTP communication will look something like the client sends hello, and the server sends hello. I think something like that.
Yeah.
And like a bunch of details, and the client says mail to whoever, and the server says okay, and then the client says mail from, and so it's like eight-ish round trips or something.
Yeah.
Something absolutely terrible.
Lots of acknowledgement which is interesting. Okay.
Yeah, which makes it very surprising that we're able to do SMTP at such mass scale, just because it's doing so much.
Right, but also explains why everything is built in Go. It's just like kind of built for scalable systems.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and so then this is kind of just a relatively dumb loop that checks some state, and so here's a variety of the fun stuff that you can hear from an SMTP server. And what's cool?
ALO wasn't a typo?
Oh no, yeah, it's not. So. Actually, so the difference is ALO, I think, is an extended hello. And so when you send hello to a SMTP server, it'll just say hi.
Yeah.
Let's see. Telnet. Is that set up? Yeah. Okay. Telnet SMTP dot sendgrid.net. Let's try was it? You can see my terminal, right?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll see if I can remember an SMTP server. Okay. But yeah, what's cool is that since it's a text protocol, unlike a lot of stuff where you'd have to like really like code it, you can actually just telnet into something and start an SMTP conversation.
Amazing.
Which can be quite hilarious.
Yeah, that's super cool. Nicholas said your terminal is gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely not for everyone doing one of these HUD terminals, and also having it a little bit see-through.
It's nice though. You get to keep a little bit of context of what
you're terminaling.
Exactly. I'm a total sucker for transparency. Very good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. Cool. That's great. So yeah, it's really simple, I guess like switch of all the possible
exactly. Yeah, so we kind of if it's unauthenticated, it does a bunch of stuff here. It says you can do that. Otherwise, it junks out. Yeah, and then we got handlers for everything. Yeah. So so you can see here's the difference between hello and ALO. So hello just says hello. ALO actually says hello and then also does a dump of all the stuff the server can do. So to say here's the max size of a message, whether I can do TLS, what types of authentication, what other stuff is available, and also that I have a help command.
Cool.
And then here you can see, so you kind of start a transaction with mail from, and then you have to say who's it to, and then you send a bunch of data. And so what's interesting is as I was writing this, and you see there's a lot of these notes directly to the RFC. So this was my first time really like reading top to bottom an RFC,
right?
Which I highly recommend. It was a little bit grueling, and understanding the RFC like format is kind of an interesting. It's a whole other like world of reading, basically. But
I have a very specific question about this. But continue. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead. Keep saying what you're saying, and I'll ask it in a sec.
Oh yeah, sure. But yeah, and so I think it really kind of defined how I ended up structuring the project, because I was kind of just reading the RFC and like, okay, I need to do this now. And you can kind of see a lot of that. And but yeah, a really interesting exercise for sure.
So what I was going to ask, and I imagine this must have been true for this one as well. So I recently tried to do this process with like the CalDAV collection of RFCs. And one of the big problems I had is that like it doesn't feel like you can read like one or two lines before you're referred to like another RFC. And I imagine that's definitely the case of SMTP, where it's like, hey, this is this RFC. Like there's such an interdependency on existing RFCs, especially in like, you know, the core infrastructure, things like SMTP. Like how did you approach doing that in a structured way without just falling down a rabbit hole?
Yeah, I mean, I remember because like, so let's see, okay. What's that going to do? Okay, let's not do that. Okay, well, we're stuck in Firefox now. Let's close that.
Okay, cool.
Anyways, so I'm gonna just copy paste that not into Firefox. Those bad habits.
This is a reality of using StreamYard, is we make all of our poor viewers use Chrome when they usually use Firefox.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is, so if you look way, so it's a big one. And it's these like obsoletes and updates that so you can see like it's updated by 5336.
That one, and these following RFCs are no longer relevant because of
that. Right. And so you kind of, the way I started, so I think I actually didn't even start on the in 2021.
Yeah.
I think I actually started on 821, which was like the original one from 1982, and which was nice because you get the really, really simple protocol. But then I was like, this seems kind of weird. There's a lot of stuff missing. And then I started to learn, okay, you got to go and look at what updated it. And but yeah, I found it fairly dense to actually tease out what the final like standard is because of that, because it's like, okay, so you can in theory be like, okay, you're looking at this one, so this is internationalized addresses, and you got to go look at this. But it feels like there's no like, this is the current definitive
like
case,
full
it's kind of,
compilation and like summary. Yeah, I definitely get that feeling.
Yeah, and so it's definitely very possible that my SMTP server itself is not fully RFC compliant. And I think there's actually some stuff in here that I didn't implement just because it was like really edge case. But
again, I definitely saw that with the CalDAV stuff. So we'd be like looking at all the CalDAV servers and like which RFCs they implement, and like on a grid, like no one implements all of it because like it's all built for a certain application. You just don't need a lot of the RFCs have to go into places that most users are never going to. So that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah. So and what's nice with SMTP is that most things have an SMTP client built in. So like Go has just SMTP.sendMail, and that made it really easy to just make sure that it was working because that's RFC compliant to some extent. So as long as it's able to send, I'm able to receive.
Cool.
And
I like this practice of linking to the actual section of the RFCs you're implementing as throughout the code. That's very cool.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of these were things where I was learning on the go. Like these two in particular are really funny because they're both very naive approaches to an SMTP server in general. Like, so the verify command, you can send an email address, I think, and it's supposed to return a yes, this email address exists, which, as you would imagine, is just a dream for a spammer who can just say, okay, what are all the email addresses on your server? I'm going to try everything.
So they get a sassy message instead.
Yeah, and then EXPN is explain. I think it's expand. Yeah, and so this is for mailer lists. So if you were to like create a mailing list of 100 people and have a single address, theoretically, a SMTP server that did expand would just send back everyone who's on the list. Oh, wow. Again, great for spammers. So this is
that says so much about the generation when that was
defined. It really does. The 80s were a whole different time, huh?
Before the birth of malicious people.
Yeah.
Incredible. Okay.
Well, I think there were still already probably some internet trolls at that point because even when the internet was DARPANET and totally private, it was full of regular jokey people. And so this is where I started just writing sassy messages like, it was worth a shot, right? Why not try verifying? Which seemed totally fine. And like as I was writing the server, interesting. So I haven't updated it. So I was saying that we updated it just recently. We updated it because of these two lines. So we have error, I blame me, and error, I blame you. So basically, this was me being like, this is a client error versus server error, and just joking around while I was writing it. Fast forward to a couple months ago when we get a very stern email from Verizon saying, we're getting these really kind of weird messages from your server that seem kind of mean. And it was like their postmaster who was basically just saying, why is your server being mean to us? So we changed it to something a little bit less, I'm writing it off the cuff and it's sassy, which was just absolutely amazing.
I love that you wrote an SMTP server that bullied Verizon.
You gotta be the little David to their Goliath.
So the first rewrite in years was just to update that message because someone else interacted with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. So I guess that's lesson number one. Things you would do differently. Level out the sass.
Yeah. At least take a look through what you're actually returning once you use something in production.
Nicholas says, to be honest, if a server was sending me its issues back, I'd laugh. But you're not Verizon, Nicholas.
It's true. That's either. So I just updated it, and so now it says server error processing. So that's a lot kinder, a lot more obvious what's going on. And I think there was also a little bit of confusion from them, like, what does it mean that you blame me? Yeah. Versus, okay, there's a server error.
Right. Cool. Okay. Awesome.
And so and I mentioned earlier that it doesn't support TLS, like it doesn't support a TLS connection straight out of the box. It kind of does. And SMTP, as it was built before TLS, was something that you required on everything. Instead, it has a start TLS function. So you basically say start TLS, and then it like upgrades it to a TLS connection. It was kind of neat. But also, again, unnecessarily chatty when you could just be TLS from the beginning and avoid having to do the handshake as part of like, I've already started talking to you.
Right.
And it also means that you can't really like maintain a connection or things like that because you're kind of doing it as part of a single request.
I see. Okay.
Which is also a little bit of an interesting thing, and I think this server supports it this way. But in theory, and I haven't really seen SMTP clients that do it this way, but in theory, an SMTP server connection allows you to send as many messages as you want, or as many messages as like the server allows you to within the time frame, or maybe a number. And so you'll see a bunch of like references to like a transaction in here, which is really just like the dumbest approach to transaction ever. But because basically you could say, hello SendGrid, or hello Mailgun, or whatever. I'd like to start sending some messages. Here's a message. Okay, I'm done that one. Here's another message. All within the same protocol, and kind of think that
so
yeah.
So you can batch them up in terms of like before you start the connection. Okay.
But I mean, the funny thing is that basically all the out of the box SMTP client stuff that I've ever worked with is all kind of assumes just one request is one message sent. So it's really kind of not used. Yeah. And surprisingly, despite that, SMTP is still quite quick. If it's definitely not the bottleneck for our sending, and we send millions of messages a day. So
fascinating. Okay, cool. Huh. I had another question, but I don't know if I want to get into that yet. So I was going to ask, so you last worked on this 5 years ago, and like I know one of the big things with Go is that like they try not to be like a radically evolving language. But is there anything that you used in this that is like would be obsoleted by some new Go feature that you do differently today?
So first of all, one of the things that has popped out of Go since this that shows up everywhere and definitely should be in here is context.
Okay.
And so context it's a fairly broad concept in Go. The base context is something that bears like a cancel. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, say I was running this SMTP server, but a whole bunch of other stuff at the same time, and I wanted to like close that all at once. Then you just cancel the one context, and it should cascade all the way through. So anything that doesn't implement context won't get that message and won't properly shut itself down.
Right.
Which, I mean, in practice isn't usually that much of a problem. Usually once you're killing off enough stuff, you're probably just killing off the whole service, and it's just the OS is killing it. But it can be useful for a bunch of things. You can also do like built-in timeouts and context and things like that, which I might have used to power some of this. Like when we get into looking at the connection, there's a lot of doing connection stuff with deadlines and things like that, and you can bear that right on the context itself.
Awesome. Right.
I think the other, like, interestingly, Go is as you say, it doesn't evolve a ton. I mean, they've been debating generics for the last ever since it opened, and they're
my favorite meme.
Yeah, and they're currently working on it apparently.
Yeah, Go whatever 2.0 or whatever thing they're calling it there.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if they're calling it 2, but so they're very conservative about it. And so a lot of this does look fairly similar to like an approximation of the style that I write in now. One of the things that just absolutely like made me cringe as I was looking at this is just how deep a lot of the nesting is.
Right.
So if you look, like, we're already a couple nested in, so we're already in this running loop.
Yeah.
And then a lot of these things will have, like if this, and if that succeeds, if this. Whereas like the pattern that we tend to use a lot more now, or at least I tend to use a lot more, and we've kind of encouraged at Customer IO, is exiting really early. So here, instead of if this, kind of the better way to write it would be to do the opposite. So if error is not nil, then you'd exit from there, and then like close this block off, so that you're not nested. So you can kind of like fairly easily see as soon as something's out and gone, and so you don't end up with these like, okay, well, I need to, because like every nesting level that you're doing. So like here I'm in the mail case, I'm in the okay, the from has succeeded cases. I'm in the there's connection has no user, and then I'm in the transaction case, and now I know that's accepted. And that's a lot of context to maintain in your head. Whereas if you've already kind of exited out of all the error cases, then you know you've done all the right stuff and you're returning to a good spot.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we deep nesting comes up a lot in these reviews, but mostly in the context of callbacks in JavaScript. But yeah, that's a good way.
I've heard a lot about the callback hell of JavaScript.
Nicholas asked, does Go support modularization of routing?
Could you clarify what you mean, Nicholas?
Yeah. There's a little bit of a time delay between us saying something and them getting it and then sending it back. So we've got some round tripping to do. So in the meantime.
So I think another thing that I kind of stood out to me a lot, there's like really, really sparse logging going on in here. Like you see there is a logger in theory. And basically I've only added logging where I absolutely needed it for debugging stuff at work, basically.
Right.
But it actually, like, whenever I go in to debug something new, I'm like, well, now I got to go like either add some logging or add print statements to figure out what's going on. So I think, putting some actual thought into the logging would have been kind of useful for this kind of thing, where it's like a building block for something else, which I think also structurally, I think I had it definitely in my head as I was writing it. This is going to be a building block for doing things.
Right.
And I probably shouldn't have been quite as excitable about what exactly that building block was. So you end up with stuff that's like, I haven't actually implemented this, but it's in here. Why is it in there? If I haven't implemented it, it's going to cause confusion.
Right.
As I mentioned earlier, there's like the possible extensions. And this is an interesting one. I was looking at this yesterday and trying to decide whether I liked it or not. But you can, in theory, disable some of the features.
Oh, so it's like feature flagging kind of built in.
Yeah, and it's on a verb level, so I could like disable LO or hello or start TLS or something.
Yeah.
Which is definitely useful for some building block cases. And I think overall, I'm probably on the side of should do it.
Yeah.
But it is kind of weird, like that you could just disable mail and just make it completely unusable. So there's better thinking there to be done.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that so I guess why wasn't this a building block? Like, why didn't those things get implemented? Did you end up like superseding with something else, or was it just like ambitions beyond your needs kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it was more an ambitions beyond needs. And I think if I remember correctly, there wasn't this clear intention to use it at work right away. Like I'd started it and I was like, I'm really curious about what's actually going on under the hood with SMTP. As I kind of got into it, I was like, this would be really useful. Then we came up with this use case for it. And it kind of ended up in there. But
awesome. Very cool. So Nicholas clarified the question and said, so with JavaScript, I can split routes into separate files and export them to the server runner. Does Go offer something similar? I guess we're talking about HTTP routes here, Nicholas, like in a web server context.
Yeah, so I think it's maybe a paradigm difference. So where my understanding is that in JavaScript, when you want to import something in JavaScript, and I could be wrong here, I write precious little JavaScript these days. You kind of just import the file that it's in, and then it kind of loads up all this stuff.
Or grab the exported module.
Yeah. So for Go, it actually everything lives in a package. So this is the SMTP package. Everything is in it. Everything that's in this directory. Right. So if I wanted a sub package, I can create one. Yeah. So instead of doing routing in that way, you would just have to like explicitly define the routes that and where they're pointing at, I think. Cool. I believe in some places in here, message possibly, Go does support things like interfaces that let you like implement stuff. So if you wanted to have like, there definitely was an interface in here somewhere. Off. So we've got Oh yeah, here's so you can say like this is a user interface.
Yeah,
we'll get into just how bad of a user interface it is, but and so it says anything that implements these two, it does kind of duck typing kind of thing. Where if it implements these two, it's an auth user. And it doesn't have to specifically implement anything else.
Cool.
And so you could probably use that for some sort of routing things as well, where as long as it meets the interface, you can use it as a route.
Cool. Nicholas,
hopefully that answers.
So I guess that answers it.
Cool.
Awesome. Cool. So you said you wanted to dive into the connections file a little bit.
Yes, connections. So connections are always interesting. And I think that the main thing that I like, so as a code reviewer, this was my first time seeing this, which effectively last night it was, because who remembers code from 5 years ago?
Yeah.
My first question is, why is the connection bearing things like addresses? That seems absolutely bizarre. I think the question here in my mind is definitely like, what is the separation of concerns here? Who's using this connection? What's the connection actually doing? Basically, the answer to that is the connection is doing way too much, and probably knows too much about what it's supposed to be doing. So like the connection is bearing a transaction, which the transaction is done in a absolutely non-thread safe way that is literally just says you can have one transaction going on, and it's identified by the timestamp it started. Not the worst thing you could do, but definitely missing some sort of mutex to make sure that it doesn't just generate two transactions at the same time.
Right.
And it bears a bunch of information about. I'm actually not even sure why. So I think it's trying to hold the state of the SMTP negotiation, since SMTP happens over several rounds of work.
Responses, yeah.
Yeah. So it kind of like gets stuff put onto it by the server itself. So it's being weirdly mutated, whereas what I would expect out of a connection is very similar to like what net.con does, or the textproto.con, which is what this is kind of wrapping, or basically. Is maybe a little bit of stuff about like how's it supposed to run, and then just the actual underlying network connection. So all this other stuff like the transaction, I would implement over top of the connection. An interesting one is that I think I had completely misunderstood how these deadlines work.
Okay.
And so I kind of added them in afterwards, because without a deadline on a request, it's just gonna try and wait forever. So if you get a server that's not responsive, but also not exiting, it'll just sit there.
So what did you misunderstand about how they worked?
I think firstly, just like we've got a lot of like these read deadlines and write deadlines, and I think that's really not that necessary for this type of use case. Yeah, I mean it's kind of an interesting question, because so I think it passes in like a 10-second deadline, but it's per round trip. So you could have just the most ill-performing SMTP server or SMTP client talking to you, and you'd accept, which is super useful if you're debugging. If I get back to like, you can send a message to it over telnet. Human scale is multiple seconds of typing, trying to remember the right thing to type, but computer scale is definitely not. So first of all, I'd probably put a deadline over the top of the connection and have something to be able to extend that deadline if you needed to.
Right.
There's also, just obvious mistakes, things like we've got read SMTP sets a deadline, then immediately calls readline, which also sets the deadline.
Oh, dang. Okay.
Yeah. So stuff like that, where I think it was done in a way that's really, really easy to make mistakes. And so now we've got these mistakes running in production.
Having overly generous deadlines isn't the worst.
Yeah. Definitely could do bigger sins here for sure.
Yeah. Bit interesting. Okay.
And I think the other thing, kind of as I was saying, that like I think there were points where I was like, okay, it needs to do something slightly different for LO versus hello, so I'll just do a write LO. But again, encapsulating that much underneath the hoods kind of seems kind of weird to put that in the connection versus having just it happen in the write SMTP and having the LO at the server level write what it actually wants instead of having to kind of. So now if you see write LO elsewhere, you're not entirely sure why, like what it's doing in the write.
Got you.
And also I think there's just stuff like there's probably better ways to like describe this write, and might even need to check. So write, I think always returns how much was written. And so probably not such a bad idea in a building block library to actually check that and make sure it wrote the right amount of stuff.
Cool. So in terms of one question I wanted to ask you was, I'm kind of looking at this and like delighting in how simple it is architecture wise. And that might just be because a lot on the show, we've been looking at a lot of, you know, like the huge monolithic web frameworks like Django and Rails.
Yeah.
But like, how did you approach architecting this? So you showed us those structs and the RFCs. Like, did you start from like the structs of what you wanted at each point and build up from there, or was it kind of just like it fell into place as you went along situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like I remember sitting and kind of staring at this server struct for a bit before I wrote anything else, and just kind of thinking through what are some things I'm gonna want to be able to do, and knowing that, you know, I'd be probably things like I don't know why there's a name and a server name. That seems like weird to craft. But yeah, so things like where, and that's where I end up with something like a rate limiter, where I'm like, oh, it would be cool to have a rate limiter. I'll just put it in there and see what happens. And here's what that structure would look like. Yeah, and then from there, I think goal number one was make it so that I can send a single SMTP message to it using the SMT client, and then from there, kind of fleshing out beyond there into the regular SMTP spec.
Cool. Awesome. Is there any I don't know if there's anything else you want to show us, but while I'm on my random question spree, is there anything you look at in this now and you're like, I'm surprised that it's working the way it has been for this long, besides the time, the deadlines?
That's a good question. I don't think there's anything that really jumped out at me as like, as you say, it is relatively simple, which is nice. I mean, it was probably of the protocols that I could have chosen to implement one-off, a nice choice. I'm unsurprised that, like, even if there had been stuff we wanted to change, I probably wouldn't have wanted to come in and change. And one of the things that really kind of bothers me about it is this whole, as I was saying, nesting, but the way that this also works with the connection is it just does these write SMTPs and doesn't like continue or return after this. So it could be doing anything further down. Like I could, like someone like, or I could have accidentally written something down here or done a fall through by accident, and it could write other stuff. And so I think there's that sort of like, it was definitely fairly write only in terms of if I wanted to go in and change or like heaven forbid implement eSMTP, which is has a whole different set of error codes. So it would be I think a relatively large rewrite to do something like that, where you're returning a whole lot more data or a whole different style of data, just because it's so tied to this write SMTP. And
so I know absolutely nothing about eSMTP. Is that like a newer standard? Where would the case be where you want to like build that out and use that?
It's mostly just for like deliverability kinds of things, I think. So I think it's largely just a set of like codes that you can use. So whereas we've got a fairly simple set, like 554 is like server errors and things like that. There's like a whole like 0.1.2.3 kind of structure of things that like really get into defining what the errors were. And I believe there was something else to it as well. And I think another thing, like getting into like, if I were to have to implement some other stuff, like there's certain text formats and things that this doesn't support. Like in theory, there's like 8-bit MIME I think is one of the calls you can say, and it's going to say this is going to be an 8-bit MIME request, and it just doesn't support that because it's not set up to stream its data in any other way than as you saw in the connection, just like write out a very dumb string.
Interesting. Cool. Oh God, sorry folks. If I bring up my arm, I get a piece of green screen in my arm. And I disappear into the background. Cool. Was there anything else when you looked at it last night that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I think the only other thing. So we have there's this. This was fascinating. I got in here and I was like, this is the message bit. So this is what actually like. So as a user of the server, if you look at the simple server, you basically just say, this is a new server. Here's how it handles a message. And that message is like the first thing you see is this like list of entropy stuff, which is like, who knows what that's for. So I had to really kind of dig into that. And what was really interesting there is that the whole purpose of that is just to avoid having to import an external library to like generate a UUID. Because all the message IDs need to be unique, but I didn't want an external dependency. In fact, you can see this, if you can read this, it says removing external dependency on whole library.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that was kind of an interesting design choice. That, and I think it does this once per message, which seems like overkill when you could just generate it once for the server and have a unique ID for the server, and then just monotonically increasing IDs or something for the messages.
Yeah,
because it doesn't really matter other than I think it's used for threading mostly in email clients.
Right.
So everything's of the same logical message group.
Interesting.
But yeah, and what I definitely find interesting is that we've got kind of these. There's a lot of really thin wrapper things where it's just trying to parse a lot of the content or parse like the MIME parts. And so I would imagine that there's better ways to handle MIME in general, which is like an email is encoded into like a bunch of group parts. That's how you can get attachments and things. So you end up with just like, here's a group, it's got a boundary that's called this, and then you can have a whole bunch of stuff underneath it. Cool. I think this actually supports like infinitely nested MIME, which I don't even know is allowed in email.
Yeah, because what's the use case for that?
Yeah, attachments that have attachments on them or something. But yeah, so I think overall this is a relatively an interesting bit of the code, especially since this is what ends up being like front and center for someone trying to use the library. And I think having thought about that a little bit, I probably would make it do a little bit smarter stuff out of the box. Like you'll see it's got like a call to BCC that goes through and actually parses the headers at runtime, which seems like a waste of effort. Versus just parsing them before you pass back the message. Because and I guess I probably did this because you aren't always going to want the BCC messages, because like you may not care in your use case, but does seem kind of weird to have to do the parsing, or at least not to cache the parsing or something once it's been parsed. Because otherwise, if you call plain several times, it's going to search for the text plain body every single time, and seems like a waste of cycles.
Interesting. So I was reading that comment about the attachments. I guess that's kind of another to do.
Yeah. This must be newer because I've switched relatively, I guess, more recently than I first started it to using the XXX instead of to do. So.
Why this? I think I missed out on this memo. Why XXX instead of to do?
I actually have no idea. I think I saw it somewhere and I just liked it more than to do. And I have no idea why one or the other, but yeah, it's just kind of a subtle switch that I made.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. Well, this has been very educational, and I feel like I need to go read some RFC SMTP. Yeah,
highly recommend it. It's not very gripping reading, but definitely a great learning experience to dig through any RFC for sure.
on the XXX, Nicholas said, "Isn't that how code works? Hey, that looks so cool. I'm doing that on my projects too." Yes, it is. Which is why I have 100 browser tabs open from doing these streams now. I'm just stealing everything from guests. Like your not equals ligature. I've been eyeing that up. That's very nice.
Oh yeah, I got a special font for that, which I should plug this font because
we really need to like start doing a thing at the beginning of these shows where we just get like our guests to show us their VS Code config.
Yeah, let's see if I can get to it. It's not in this one. Nope. Oh. Good icons, everybody. Must be end user.
There's like, oh, there it is, right there. It was right on that last page you were on.
Yeah, there you go. Fire a code.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, and the theme is Dracula, in case anyone's interested in that as well.
Perfect.
Which is good for the spooky Halloween season.
Yeah.
But also, I use it all year round.
Got to be spooky season all year round.
Yeah, keep it spooky, awesome. Everyone.
So before I drop your screen share, is there anything else you wanted to show us or talk about on this project?
No, I think that, I mean, I did a very much more in-depth code review on it last night, and I could probably talk about it for 3 hours at this point. But yeah, I think that covers kind of the big stuff I wanted to talk about. So
awesome, very cool, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for showing us that and for running us through your thoughts on being a technical lead. It's been wonderful on the show. If folks have questions for you or want to reach out and ask about anything, is there a place people can reach you on the internet?
Great question. I am.
No worries if there isn't. That's totally okay as well.
I'm largely a pretty quiet presence on the internet.
That's totally fine. You guys send people to this repo instead.
Yeah, you can send it there, ask questions there. You could email me at steven@customer.io. That's totally fine too. Cool. If you want to drop me a message there. Technically, I'm How Now Steven all over the internet, but you won't see a whole lot of activity on that. I think my last tweet was probably around the same time I last updated that library.
I did notice that when I was doing the pre-show guest following. I also had a question to ask you, which was about your cat walking habits.
Yes.
So showing your picture, is walking your cat on a leash a regular?
It is a regular thing. We've been doing it since he was a kitten. It's been very useful. We've traveled a lot with him. So
that's awesome.
He's been to Germany, France, Korea twice, and Japan.
He's like, what? How does the bringing an animal into that country work in that way? Like, do you have a pet passport going on?
Yeah, well, so interestingly, when we lived in Scotland, he got issued an EU pet passport, which is just like all the veterinary stuff. Yeah. And it's got a little spot for a photo, which is very cute. But the hardest place to get into is Japan because they're completely rabies free. Right. And so it's a very extended process to actually bring a cat in.
Quarantine or anything when you bring them there? I guess that would make the holiday undoable, right? Like,
yeah. So in theory, it's a 6-month quarantine, but you can do it in your country of origin. So you have to. We sent his blood to like a lab in Kansas somewhere, and they said, "Okay, there's no rabies in this blood. See you in 6 months."
Yeah.
And took us two attempts to actually manage it. That's why we went to Korea the first time, is because we messed up the Japan the first time. Right. But yeah, and so he's now very intrepid.
Because I now need to know, like, does he stay in the cabin on the plane or is he in the hold?
Yeah, he goes in the cabin. He's been in the hold once, and it was a nightmare experience for him. So if we can't fly with him in cabin, he doesn't go.
That's amazing. That's very cool. Nice. I didn't realize these things are possible with a cat. That's spectacular.
Yeah, well, I guess that's what this stream's for. Just
cat
learning new things about cats.
And hey, Harry dropped into the chat, said he was here from the Pterodactyl Live, because he is. For those of you who weren't here for the Pterodactyl Live, we invited the folks from the Pterodactyl project on. It's a open source project for managing game servers, and they decided to mention everyone in their 8,000 person Discord server, and that was the most stressful night of my life. when 300 people entered the chat.
Oh, wow.
I was not ready for that. I was like, cool, a nice night of a chill stream, and then I had to call John to come help me moderate. Woo. But yeah, thank you for sticking around, Harry. It's much appreciated. So yeah, cool. Let's call it there. Thank you so much, Stephen. That's been awesome. And I've dropped the link to the GitHub repo if anyone wants to see how SMTP should be implemented. I think that's a great place to start. And you point to all the RFCs, so it's a very educational project. That's super cool. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks everybody. It's really great to get to hang out with y'all for the last hour or so.
Alrighty, I will do the backstage shuffle. See you soon.
Great. Cheers.
Alrighty, thank you again, Stephen. So that is not our last show of the day. We have one more show left. That will be happening in about 4 hours and 45 minutes. It's happening at 8 p.m. UTC, 10 p.m. my time, which is when I'm usually unable to speak English as a host, which is why tonight you have our lovely founder, John Britton. John will be the host for the stream tonight. And tonight we are being joined by Corey Alexander, who once upon a time was doing Ruby. So we're going to be doing a two-parter there. We're going to be doing the old code game, what we've been doing with Stephen here today, reviewing a project of Corey's called Sleet and talking about that project and what Corey would do differently today and why Corey no longer works on that project. And then we're going to change tact and look at a project that Corey maintains nowadays, which has a very interesting journey because he originally wrote it in Bash. It was a collection of Bash scripts, and then he migrated it to a more maintainable Rust project. So super excited to hear about that. And again, John will be hosting that show, and it's always a pleasure and delight to have John visit the channel. So that will be tonight in about 4 hours and 45 minutes. But if you want to hear what's coming up next week, first of all, follow the show. If you want to get notifications, next week is the last week of Oktoberfest, the last week where we're doing this 3 times a day, every day thing. There's going to be packed with 15 shows just next week. And you want to make sure you get all those notifications. So you can follow us on Twitch, hit the love heart, and then hit the bell. That will give you notifications. You can also follow us on Twitter at RaisedDevs, where we tweet an hour before every show. But right now, let me give you a preview of what we've got coming up. Over the weekend, this link down here, twitch.tv RaisedDevs schedule, will be updated to cover the shows we have next week. But for now, I will give you a speed run through all of those guests. Here we go, firing up the calendar. So Monday, we have Tanya Allard from Microsoft. We have Ian Jennings. He's a freelance developer experience consultant, does really cool things with helping companies sort their developer experience out. Last show that day on Monday, we have Michelle Mannering, developer advocate from GitHub in Australia. Tuesday, Prince Wilson, amazing dude, I cannot wait. We've got Dev2 Takeover, where Dev2 take over the show and work on Forum, their Ruby on Rails app that powers their site. So that'll be Nick Taylor and one of his colleagues live coding on Forum. I get to just hang out in the background and learn something and watch them for a change and not talk. It's lovely. And Nick is an awesome guy, really does a great show. His own stream is excellent as well. So Tuesday, Dev2 Takeover. Then we have Marcin from the Enzo project. Enzo is a programming language that's both a textual programming language and a visual programming language. They simultaneously update for working in data. It's super cool. That's Tuesday evening. Then on to Wednesday, we have Mr. Matt Cowley himself back. Community platform manager at DigitalOcean, has been doing a lot of work on Hacktoberfest this year. We heard from him last Wednesday where we spoke about Hacktoberfest. This coming Wednesday, we're going to talk about his other job, which is maintaining CDN.js, a content delivery network that's used for a large portion of the internet. Matt is also a maintainer of that, so we're going to dive into that code. Then we've got Wilhelm Klopp. He runs his own software business. If you've used Slack, you've definitely used his app. It's called Simple Poll. Almost every Slack installation at this point has Simple Poll, I think. Wilhelm used to work with me at GitHub and then left to basically make Simple Poll his full-time job, and he's launched a bunch of products since. So we're talking to Wilhelm again about that journey. Then we've got Angel Rivera from Circle CI. We're going to talk about all things continuous integration. Who would have guessed it? Thursday, Guan Luca from Equinix Metal. Then we have Nathaniel Okamwa from Twilio, and we have Sam Lanning from the UN, which I'm very excited to hear about. Friday, we have Nicholas Carrigan himself. Oh yeah, John, we better be rated by the party corgis. Friday, we have Nicholas Carrigan himself. Nicholas, our MVP in chat. Nicholas, we still need to make time to talk about what we're going to do. It will be great. Then we have Eddie back. Eddie was our first guest on the show. He's an open source advocate, spends a lot of time helping people to get into open source. We had him at the beginning of the show. We're going to have him again at the end of Hacktoberfest to talk about how Hacktoberfest has been for him and his community. And then finally, our very own Chris Ewald, who you will have heard from if you watched any of our past shows of any of the Raise alumni. He's a coach. He's a developer. He helps people develop their code. He built the original the Hacktoberfest site. Had a big rework a year or two ago. He worked on that. We're going to be hearing from him there as well. That is our last week of shows. It's going to be huge. And other than that, something for me today. Last reminder, if you don't know who we are, what we do, we are Raise.dev. We are here to help you level up in your developer career, whether you're trying to get your first developer job or get a promotion or get a raise. We have expert coaches who will help you get the experience to do just that. We are completely free. You can meet a coach completely for free whilst you're in early access at Raise.dev. So I hope we see you later on for our next show in about 4.5 hours. 8 p.m. UTC with John and Corey. If we don't see you today, have a lovely weekend, and I hope we see you sometime next week. That has been all from us for this particular show, I'm going to go have a nap and some dinner. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. This is me continuing to speak while I find the banner I wanted. There we go. Farewell, everyone.